Good morning, everybody. This is Kamal Pan from IHM PUSA. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to this webinar, which is there on the food of. I would like to tell you the background about organizing this webinar. You may be aware that there is a very a program being launched by the Ministry of Tourism, Government of India. In fact, Government of India called Ek Bharat Shresth Bharat, in which for national integration, the youth is getting involved into learning about the culture of one region from the other. And there are states, which are paired with other states, which are in contrast with the culture, language, and everything which is there in the human life. And Delhi, under that program, has been paired with a small state, a Himalayan state called Sikkim. And what a contrast in topography, in the culture, in the people, it is in food and everything. And recently we had a similar program done by IHM Gangtok, which is a state institute of hotel management Gangtok, and talking about the ingredients which are used in their cuisine and what they like to eat and how they process their food. And as a reciprocal event, we had to organize something, and we thought that anything worth doing is worth doing well. And that is how I reached out to all my friends and people who have really done incredible work in the area of researching Delhi's cuisine and the culture of the people of Delhi. And this is how I have been able to bring, 5 gems together. And I'm grateful to each one of you. And I'm very fortunate. I feel very lucky that somebody like Dr. Colleen O'Brien is also amidst us. And the kind of work that she has done in researching the cuisine of Delhi and kind of books that she has authored in this area, they are commendable. And I think we are using, I have read one book which is written by her, researching the food of every state of our country. And what a delight it is to go through that book. And it is enlightening also. Certain things, I feel proud of my country now after having gone through the book that she has authored. So it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Carmen O'Brien to this webinar. As you can see, she's, and I like very nicely, a big thing that she has written about herself, that she's a thinker. And I think each one of us have to try to cultivate to be a thinker in our lives in our own ways. So she has authored number of thinker books, recipes from an urban village, a from Hazrat Nizamuddin Basti, the Penguin Food Guide to India. This is the book I have had the pleasure of reading, and a number of books, about food of Delhi is another book that she has authored. She is writing more books on cuisine, and she has written and she has written a book on Australia and about the Raj which was there in Australia, the colonial food habits in Australia. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Carmen. Thank you, and we are looking forward to a number of, you. There's a lot of ground that we are trying to.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I can't. It went a bit. It dropped out a bit. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I just thought I'd start because I've got the speculative part of Delhi's food history, I think, and
right up to the level when the Delhi Sultanate started in Delhi.
Yes. So I got the speculative part in many ways. So I thought what I'd do is I'd start at the beginning, and I thought, well, I'll give you just a short reading from the beginning of a book I wrote called Flavors of Delhi, which I wrote in 2001, 2002. every city has
And
a
right. And let me have the pleasure of presenting Mr. Gautam Anand, Diwan Gautam Anand Sahab to you. He's a career executive with the ITC Group, and ITC Group, we can call it as a pride of the country. It has done yeoman service to propagating the Indian culture and cuisine globally. The uh, restaurants like Bukhara, the Dampuk, the Dakshin, these are iconic brands that each Indian is proud of. And I'm sure that Mr. Anand had a great deal to contribute to these wonderful brands. Another publication which was being brought out by ITC Group, which was called the Welcome Jest. I understand that Mr. Anand was the person behind that publication, and he edited that magazine of ITC Group for a long time. What a wonderful work it is, and we all are waiting to see, right, the period between the Delhi Sultanate period and up to the Mughal era. That is the ground that Anand is going to cover for us today. It's a pleasure to have you amidst us today, Mr. Anand. You're most welcome to this webinar, sir.
नवाजिशें इनायत मेहरबानी.
Shukriya, Janab. And then after Mr. Anand, we have the pleasure of having Mr. Chef Umesh Mat. It's a pride for us to say that he's an alumnus of IHM PUSA, the batch of 1982, and he's a head of the Anubhav Hospitality and works in the area of facility designing, works for IHM PUSA. He has been instrumental in upgrading the kitchens in our institution. And I am very pleased to share here that I have seen some of the work, the kind of transformation he has been able to, bring about in many independently owned hotels, and especially in the area of food and beverage services and facilities management. It is a wonderful job that Chef Amesh Matu has been doing, and he has special interest in the British Raj era food, and number of restaurants like the Piccadilly in Connaught Place, which gathered, a lot of storm while it was at the haze, and many more, the Sola Tupi and other outlets. He has helped, start in Delhi NCR region, and it will be a delight. Wonderful insights he is going to give us, the kind of ingredients, how they changed after British came to India. There were certain items, which were frowned upon by the native people in India, and the Britishers popularized them and transformed the way people in Delhi and in India generally ate. So, welcome, Chef Umesh. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Pant.
Welcome, sir. Then we have Chef Harpal. Harpal has been a year senior to me in the institution, and I can speak for hours about this chef, the happy chef that we have, the Namak Shamak chef. I have known Harpal for past 35 years, and I have always known him as a person who finished the institution, and I was a cross-country runner when I joined the institution, and it was the annual sports, and we were both participating. Longest race was 3,000 meters, and all the laps, I was leading. And last lap, I see a person, in his small Rumala, he dashed, he was, and he the dog running after him. And he shot away and finished at the finishing line. So since that day, I know Harpal as a person who finishes very strong. In the beginning, one may not really look at him as a very big competition. And a number of initiatives that he has taken, travel country, nook and corner, talk to people. His research is more, person to person, interacting with people and digging out the secrets and the important things about the cuisine of the places. And he has been to many places in Delhi as well, and it is going to be a delight. He comes from from the region of Punjab, and he will have some stories. The partition was the biggest event happened in our modern history, and the food, how it changed, transformed after the partition of the country and the great migration which was there between India and Pakistan regions, and how it has evolved over the years. So that is the area we will be requesting Chef Harpal to cover today.
Thank you, Kamal.
And last but not least, Sapra. Mr. Sapra, I am a fan of yours. I've seen so many of your episodes. It's not possible for people like us in their day-to-day life to visit every place, but you get satisfaction going through some of the YouTube material content that you create. Now, the kind of research, I had the pleasure of just bumping into you in 2017, and it was the same place where I bumped into Mr. Gautam Anand for the first time. It was India International Center. You have just made your presentation, and the conviction and the details and with the finesse, you are able to talk about food is tremendous. People can read. He is a master's in political science from Delhi University. He has done a course in rural development and that background. But I think he is one of the most blessed persons possibly walking on the streets today, because his profession is the same as what his passion is. And I'm sure kind of research, every square inch, I would not say every square yard of it has been covered by Mr. Sapra. And like the soul of Delhi food today, every person, who is serving the food to the people, to the visitors, to the native people, to the poor people who are on daily wages, and tremendous job you are doing. And Mr. Sabra, I really look forward to hearing from you today, and I'm sure that the audience, my viewers today, are going to be greatly benefited by your input to this webinar today. Thank you very much for accepting to be a part of this panel.
Very good. Excellent.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sapra. So now, ladies and gentlemen, now the real action begins. I do not want to wait. It will be a pleasure for me to invite Dr. Carmen O'Brown, and I will request her, because we all know that cuisine of a place, there are so many factors which influence how it would be shaping. The climate is one, the prosperity of the people is another one, the availability of ingredients and the know-how of agriculture and processing. So many things are there. And the kind of ingredients which were available in India or in the area which is the geographical region of Delhi, what all were available at that time and what was the kind of food. There is a great cover. Foreign empire was there. I think it was a whole of a lot of China and right to Persia. The reign of this empire was there, followed by Gupta period, Gupta Empire. Again, the reign of the was very, very large. It was probably not a prominent city at that time, maybe an outpost or a crossroad where people, the caravans and the armies or the other people, traders, were moving from and taking a rest and shelter for a short time. So I would request Dr. Kamen to please take the stage and share the cuisine and the way the food and the eating habits of people in India and India were during that time. So Dr. Kamin, yours.
tell you what I've got to say. I thought, as I said, I got the speculative bit of this because some of this is not, you know, people are still finding out more about, you know, this very ancient part of India's history. So I thought, because I got the beginning, I thought I'd start at the beginning. I thought I'd just read something from a book I wrote called Flavors of Delhi, which I wrote in 2001, 2002. Every city has a beginning, and the chronological starting point most often cited for Delhi is around 1450 BC. It was at this time that the seminal city of Delhi, Indraprastha, is said to have been established on the right bank of the Yamuna. The available literary historical references describe Indraprastha as a city of gleaming white buildings and pavilions set upon broad, well-planned streets, marked at intervals with spectacular water tanks, ponds, lakes, and pleasure hillocks. Most prominent amongst the city's buildings and manicured gardens was a golden pillared hall studded with precious stones. At its centre there was an immense lotus pond of such exquisite clarity as to appear like glass. The epithet, the admiration of the world, does not seem immoderate for such a city. The timely services of the voracious fire god Agni had also cleared the dense forest around Indraprastha, making the land suitable for agriculture. The source of this splendid vision of Indraprastha, the Mahabharata, is one of the great epics of India. Its central story, you all know, I don't need to inform anybody here what the Mahabharata is about. So this is a source. The purpose of it is allegorical. So, I mean, it is a mythological work, but there's consideration that there's a lot of fact which this story has been built around in. Archaeological discoveries have shown that Delhi is an ancient city, but sadly they do not support the popular birth date of Delhi or the majestic description of Indraprastha found in the Mahabharata. There is no material evidence of human habitation in Delhi circa 1450 BC, but pottery shards and other artefacts unearthed at the Indraprastha site, which is the Purana Quilla area, indicate habitation of the area around 1000 BC. I'm also aware that there's constant archaeological work going on there to try and see if there is a lost city. The findings also quash the notion that a city existed on this site around 1000 BC. The most feasible picture of Indraprastha is that of a village with its inhabitants dwelling in compact houses constructed of earth, wooden poles and sticks, hardly the gleaming edifices of the Mahabharata that the Mahabharata describes. There is also supporting evidence that the impenetrable forests that once covered the Delhi area were devoured by fire, but the absence of iron tools in 1000 BC meant that burning on such a large scale was the only method available to clear such dense growth. So the people who inhabited Delhi were likely people referred to as the Aryans, who founded the Vedic system, is now referred to as Hinduism. They're believed to have assumed the Harappan culture, which I found interesting because some of the descriptions in that description I read out about Delhi sound more like a Harappan city. But the Aryans, I realise a lot of this history is up for grabs, but let's just call them Aryans. They were agriculturalists. They didn't build cities. They came with a meat and milk diet. They were nomadic. And they settled in the area that we now call Delhi. And then they expanded their diet to include local foods. So they grew barley, millet, wheat, legumes, kidney beans, sesame. They'd also learnt to extract oil from seeds. They grew different varieties of rice. Now, this would have taken a period of time for them to become successful and sophisticated agriculturalist. They ground different grains, different cereals into flours, and they made them into little cakes, which they fried, and they spread with honey and ghee, which in my mind reminds me of something like an aloo tikki chaat. This fried item with both sweet and savoury flavours on it. They also made, like pottages of rice and lentils. So you've got your foundations of khichdi there. They cooked meat with curds, meat with rice. So you've got, something perhaps like a palau. Some of those, that meat and rice dishes are also have come in from Persian culture, but there were dishes here that were similar to that. So lots of fruit and vegetables. Foods would have been local and seasonal. So vegetables were pumpkins, gourds, cucumbers, leafy green vegetables, radishes. Then there were jackfruits, mangoes, native citrus. And then there were things as pomegranates. So, and they grew their vegetables in the wet areas, so along riverbanks, around ponds, around wells. So, over time we get a very sophisticated food production system with a very significant variety of foods in it. Again, as I'm saying, they would have been local foods, and they certainly would have been seasonal. Of course, there was a lot of dairy. I mean, the milk, curd, and ghee were foundational in that cuisine. Also, people used grinding stones. They cooked on what we would call a tava, cooked in dishes that were like a karai. So, what you're looking at really in this area is the foundations of India's cuisine. Certainly, India's Hindu India's cuisine. They did use spices, and it's interesting. There's an evolution of use of spices over time. So initially there was mustard, long pepper, turmeric, and fenugreek, which are all native to India. Then you get black pepper, again native to India, but perhaps more in the south. Hing, coriander, and cinnamon. Then later you develop cardamom comes in, ginger, cumin, and there's mention of nutmeg and cloves, which I want to come back to. So these are used, and spice meat cooked in spice sauces, are dishes that evolve. So if you're moving into the Mauryan and the Gupta empires, I'm not expert on those particular empires, but I haven't found anything that suggests that the food that was eaten at that time was that different to what I've just described. Again, of course, it involves. So I thought that perhaps a more interesting thing, so going back to the Mahabharata, and there is a lot of food mentioned in the the epics and the Vedas. It's very often lists of food. Sometimes it mentions the way it's cooked, or it might mention a dish, but it's very often lists of food. What I find interesting is just in those sources, because they're semi-mythological or mythological. I don't want to get into that argument, but I'm a food historian, and I've read a lot about a lot of old sources of information about food. And what I find is, in most cases, when food's being described, even in fiction, people tend to describe food accurately. They don't tend to make it up, unless it's a fantasy novel, or unless they're imagining some fantastical feast. People tend to write. Oh gosh, can you? Yes. People tend to write what they know, but that might also be meaning, for example, they think that what's written in the Mahabharata is actually more representative of the people that wrote the actual epic in 500 BC, not necessarily representative of what was being eaten in 1000 BC. So I do find that there is veracity in these sources around what people were eating. So I find that interesting in terms of, you know, historical sources. But the other things I wanted to say, which I thought might be more interesting to move this on, was to, because of where we're going with this, was just to ask, you know, think the questions, why does a cuisine evolve? And Kamal mentioned some of those points. So I just wanted to, you know, I thought I could possibly add to this in a way of sort of giving a framework for us to be thinking, and that is, so a cuisine will evolve because of stability. People settle down. So the Aryans were previously nomads. Their cuisine wouldn't have particularly evolved. They would have been eating the same thing because they were moving around. So you need stability. Then, of course, you need a variety of foods are available. So if you're an Eskimo, you know, your food sources probably haven't evolved very much for however long. So your food's pretty simple. You need the resources to then to cook, like to prepare the food. You need vessels, you need utensils to shape and fashion food into different items. So you need all of that. You actually need a population where you've got enough people to spare to be able to work on the food. You know, that people have the time to create and experiment. It's not a, you know, it's not a sort of an immediate, we're hungry, we've just got to cook something as simply as possible. So you need to have that happening. So the next part of that is cuisine changes because of new ideas and new influences. And who brings those in? Well, people bring those in. So there is, you know, story that the Buddha preached some important sermons around Indraprastha, and he's also said to have commented that the people in Indraprastha ate food that was influenced by Buddhism. Now, I don't know, he doesn't give any detail, but let's just presume that what he meant was perhaps they didn't eat as much meat. They were sort of leaning more towards vegetarianism. So here's a change that's come in, you know, with an individual or a philosophy. The other thing that certainly something I'm going to do more work on, and I think it's fascinating, and that is trade. You know, the role of trade in changing India's or the evolution of India's cuisine, and of course that will be talked about further on. So the Mauryan Empire and the Gupta Empire were trading. Not only were they were trading internationally. And also, if you think about an empire, those big empires, they were, you know, took over almost all or large parts of India. Soldiers, diplomats, they would have been moving around the country. They would have gone to different parts of the country. And we're talking about a time when people couldn't really, I mean, you couldn't really store food. You couldn't take food with you for months on end. So they must have been eating local foods. And the food people ate around India would just have been different because of the geography, because of the climate. So they would have eaten different foods. So they would have perhaps picked up ideas, taken them back. They would have gone into courtly cuisine, into trading communities, perhaps more than your everyday person to start with. So, and then if they were trading internationally, what things were coming in? So, for example, going back to my mention of cloves and nutmeg, they're not native to India. Those spices are native to the Moluccas, to Indonesia, and they were great items of trade. So if as the record says, these spices were being eaten at in Delhi's early period, and I'm extrapolating that from general information about food in ancient India, then that trade's bringing that in. Hing's from Afghanistan, cinnamon from Sri Lanka. So, trade is changing the cuisine. It's helping it evolve. So a cuisine evolves through all those things, and that's what this talk will go through. The other thing that is, and it's particularly important in India, is a cuisine will evolve from major events, major disruptions, the coming of Islam, partition, major family, there's all sorts of major events, that will change. COVID's probably going to change the food system. So these are the things that cause a cuisine to evolve. So I'm going to stop there. I thought that was what I could perhaps usefully contribute to the discussion at this point, and move on to next person.
Thank you, Dr. Brian. What a wonderful insight you have given to us, and linking a life-changing kind of an event like COVID and similar events which were there probably there in the past, and the nomadic nature of the Aryans and different very wonderful. And I have that you have mentioned is that when people wrote about the Mahabharata epic, the food that has been mentioned there is more the reflection of the people who wrote the epic rather than
Yes.
the characters who actually ate that kind of food.
Yeah.
And
that's always something to be careful of when you read, particularly older sources of food. People, it's that whole thing, the victors write history. Well, the people whoever, a lot of food history is representative more of the person or the class the person belongs to than perhaps, in my work, particularly I with the Penguin Food Guide. I mean, I travel to every state of India. I've spent an enormous amount of time traveling because you need to see what people are actually doing. And unfortunately, we can't go back to 1000 BC to see that. So,
absolutely. The phrase Dr. Kamen said, she said that the victors, they have the right to write the history. And that's exactly what I would like to, invite Mr. Anand to comment on. He is going to take us through the period after the Tomar era and the Chauhans who were ruling Delhi from Ajmer and different places. But when the Delhi Sultanate came into existence, probably whatever was already existing, that was kind of overwritten, and then it was the new things which were brought, their culture and their value systems and their way of thinking and manifesting their culture and beliefs that came about in the cuisine of Delhi as well. So I would like to invite Mr. Anand and request him to please take through the medieval period in India when the Muslim rulers came, the victors, they started changing the history, the landscape of the city in more way than one, and most definitely in the food landscape of the city. Mr. Anand.
Thank you. First of all, I must say that Mr. O'Brien's dissertation was absolutely fantastic and fabulous. I just have a small story about what she was talking about. So, and this is anecdotal. I am not a historian. I am a storyteller, and I am not up to scrutiny. But there is a fabulous, interesting story about how Chandragupta traveled from Patliputra to study in Takshila. Takshila is a university on the extreme northwest of India, and Patliputra is on the extreme. So young people travel to Cambridge, and Macedonians were vociferous writers. Unlike we unfortunately have had a oral tradition, but the Macedonians talk very interestingly about something known as a weed-like substance, which eventually was sugar. And
तू 1 लाख की जगह 1.5 लाख कमा पाएगा.
and they found lots and lots and lots of
और
onions.
करेंसी सबसे बड़ी बात करेंसी. तू
And
1 लाख
then-
भी कमाएगा ना तो चीजें सस्ती हो जाएगी.
And the third thing that they found, which was
अभी
served,
महंगी इसलिए है, बनती
porous,
1 लाख चीज है, खरीदने वाले 2 लाख है.
there's some in the middle, so I can't, I don't know. Anyway, so there is, and they found that they were served a malpura made of barley and jaggery, naturally sugar. And so this is good for Chef Sohi as well, that what was served was actually khand, our raw sugar. And so therefore, and the Macedonians called this person with very shiny eyes Sandracotus, which eventually became Chandragupta. So there was lots of traveling, as she rightly said, between all parts of this. What was it called? Akhand Bharat or whatever. Anyway, that's not the point. My relevance, of course, is on the Delhi side. So I quickly come back from the anecdote about Chandragupta to where we are. Now, there was a tract of land on the Yamuna which was at the borders of two great kingdoms. There was Prithviraj Chauhan who ran his kingdom from Ajmer, and there was a fabulous man, a fabulous king called Harshvardhan of Thanesar or Ujjain. And Delhi was in between these two great kingdoms. Now, the Central Asian hordes were being persecuted by the Mongols, and they needed a safe getaway. All right. Now, the Mongols were the nemesis, were the COVID of their era. And the Central Asian horde descended on Delhi, which was by and large a little vulnerable. And they weren't exactly very pleased with what they saw locally, right? The local people, as we have done from the Vedic periods, like to eat alone. They like to eat individually. And I don't want to get into some parochialism of caste and class, but no sight shall see the man or woman eat. There was no communal eating. It was all individual eating. So therefore, you're not surprised that the thali was possibly the world's first personalized eating utensil, along with the dona, or in Sanskrit it's called dona. Individual eating. There was no ready-to-eat foods. You couldn't buy food on the street. You couldn't buy bread on the street. Everything had to be made at home. Now the Central Asians, and they were all bachelors. Most of them were men running off. And why did they come to India? They certainly did not come because of heat and dust. Now, India has had an obsession from time immemorial. So, India was a net exporter of agricultural produce. The Indus Valley, as Ms. O'Brien mentioned, was an exporter. They exported sugar, copious amounts of sugar, copious amounts of onion, and strangely enough, water buffalo, and even bitumen and so forth. But they imported the three noble metals, which the Vedas glorify, which is gold, silver, and bell metal. Copious amounts of it. Now, the Mongols followed the gold. India was the land of not milk and honey, it was the land of milk and sugar. So, yes, you can blame us for having given the world diabetes, but that's not the point. So the Central Asians came. They came from bustling cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and so on and so forth. And they are the ones who first set up Delhi's first ready-to-eat shops, Pret-a-manger. So you could now go, and they were men, and they weren't cooking at home, so they needed to buy their meat, their fowl, their whatever curry or salan or breads. So the loha tandoor came. So a lot of this ready-to-eat food was then made available. So what I've written out is something which I will read out to you. So it says, in many ways, the history of Delhi is the history of cuisines, fragrances, fabrics, and architectural styles that came with various waves of immigrants over the centuries. these were so seamlessly adapted into the indigenous culture and taste that their origins are often forgotten or mindfully overlooked. Delhi's legacy starts essentially at this inflection point of the Delhi Sultanate, because they now suddenly bring this whole universe of eating and drinking out in the public. So if you look at the Mughal refrain called Hum Pyala, Hum Niwala, it means my cup is our cup. My food is our food. So the sharing of food, the sharing of drink, this whole concept of communal eating became an advent or the inflection point of change. So when I and many of you eat together, right, it's thanks to the Central Asian. Nobody was eating together, let me assure you, before the Central Asians came. Then, of course, the history of civilization is also the history of cuisine, food, culture, and cooking. And Delhi, for me, has always been the microcosm of that. So if you look at the attributes of what the world has seen Indian food as, for instance, Miss O'Brien comes from Australia, and she's familiar there is something known as a samosa, which must be available in every other store, irrespective of whether it's an Indian store or a Selfridges or whatever else. But it's thanks to the Central Asian. The baked bread, the baking of the bread, the art of baking is thanks to the Central Asians. The indigenous curry is actually the salan. And the reason I'm saying so with confidence is because if you read Shah Hussein's Kafi, very morosely writes, Dukha di roti te sulya da salan, which means the bread of remorse and the curry of thorns. The salan was the indigenous curry. It was the Central Asians, because of what Miss O'Brien just mentioned, travel-worthy food. Now, because they were conquerors, they needed to travel. And therefore, the khalia came into focus. The khalia was preserved by copious amounts of turmeric. Turmeric is antiseptic, it's also a preservative. And we already had the ghee. And then, of course, the meat. And yes, what makes an appearance now is now the respect that the Indian goat deserves everywhere in the world and was possibly respected then, but it became focus of the world during the Delhi Sultanate, the Indian goat or the bakra, right? So, contrarian to our belief, the Central Asians were not only buffalo or cow eaters, they loved the Indian goat. So therefore came the khalia. So we've now got the samosa, we've got the khalia, and we already have the salan and so on and so forth. Then the Vedic sages remind us that karma is not a linear process. It is a circle. What goes around comes around. So whereas the Central Asians flourished and they introduced their naans and their samosas and their khaliyas and communal eating and communal drinking and dancing, now because more and more gold was amassed, more and more land was being amassed, and I'm not talking about the Deccan Sultanate, I'm talking about the Delhi Sultanate, animosity came in, sibling rivalry came in, people started getting food poisoned. So by the time Babur invades India and defeats Ibrahim Lodi in Agra, it is his mother, Dilawar Begum, who insists on giving Babur a meal, which Babur agrees to. Dilawar Begum food poisons Babur's food. So remember what I've just told you, that the Vedic sages tell us that the karma is not a linear process, it is a circle. What goes around comes around. The axe forgets, but the tree remembers. Because Babur got food poisoned, they introduce a concept of Mir Bakawal, or the controller of the household, and the thali makes a comeback. Remember the thali that the pre-Delhi Sultanate period people were eating? The thali is now called the khan, and the khan, the belief is that the food can wait for the king, but the king cannot wait for the food. Now, what happened in the later medieval period is that this communal eating was left to the awam, or what they call as the miskin. The miskin are poor people. But the rais started protecting themselves by eating individually in corn, bejeweled corns, sealed with the controller of the household and so on and so forth. Now, the question is, whatever happened to, what did the Mughals do that the Central Asians hadn't done? The Central Asians had certainly introduced public eating, ready-to-eat shops. You could eat in the bazaars. And I was born in Nizamuddin, so I know that some of the shops that Ms. O'Brien visited have pre-existed for the last 800 years or 600 years or 500 years, or at least the topography of the land hasn't changed for as many years, right? But what significantly happened is that every time there's a new wave of immigrants, their needs change, their groceries change. Instead, like Harpal will talk about the Punjabi immigrants, right? They introduced their own version of food. So the markets became flourishing. And remember, at the heart of India's glory is its agricultural produce surplus, net exporters of grain and net importers of gold. The world comes to India to follow the gold. What can we attribute to the Mughals? Well, actually, when you learn to bake a cake, then somebody has to do the fudant or the icing. The Mughals certainly did the icing on the cake, right? They sophisticated, lots of wealth. They certainly introduced a much more finer dining principle, right? Wines were imported from Shiraz. Interestingly enough, Shah Jahan's daughter loved to have Shiraz wine, and by the way, the Shiraz wine that they imported from Iran was not the red that you and I drink of. It was in those days a white wine, a fragile wine. And Maharaja Sansar Chand of Kangra, who incidentally was not conquered by the Mughals, would send every day on saddleback snow. Now look what's happening. Every day a saddleback of fresh snow from the Himalayas was sent for Princess Jahanara. She would combine, and a factory of rose water in Haldi Ghati was set up to provide her with fresh rose water. So Shiraz wine, which was white, rose water from Haldi Ghati, snows from the Dholadar range sent by Sansar Chand, and Begum Jahanara would like to have this drink almost every day. So yes, the glamorization, the pomp and pageantry, the bejeweled food. For instance, your culture of kushtas. The kushtas are aphrodisiacs. Gold, silver, crushed pearls. This whole concept of what they call as Mughal embellishments, the zakat, the delicacies were all introduced under the Mughals. So, what is the most significant change that the Mughals did is that they introduced the khorma. So we had the salan, the basis of our Vedic food. The Delhi Sultanate introduced the khalia, travel-worthy food, जो सफरी खाना होता है, food that travels well. उसमें आप turmeric डालेंगे, preservatives नहीं थे उन ज़मानों में, and the Mughal introduced the khorma. Now, by the time the Portuguese, wily Portuguese, also came running for the gold. Remember, the Greeks didn't come for the heat and dust. They came running after the gold. The Portuguese did not come for the heat and dust. They came running after the gold because pepper was going to Rome The Holy Roman Empire was importing a ton of pepper in exchange for a ton of gold, right? And the Yemeni soldier, the Yemeni navy had been outsourced the cargo. They were the merchant ships of the Kerala king. I'm deviating, but I'm giving you the logic of why people come, right? If you go to a wedding in Kerala, the bridegroom or the bride is full of gold. There's so much of gold you can't see her face. So we have been net importers of gold then, and now you've seen the recent scandal of some more smuggling happening on gold. We are obsessed with the damn metal. You know, if somebody was to privatize or monetize the private gold held by India, it will surpass any other nation in the world. But the private gold is something which we've been importing, right? So yes, the Mughals did that. Then I think, for me, the Mughals' biggest contribution, apart from architecture and refinement and the glamorization, is that they started writing, right? And as Professor Pant very rightly said, or Ms. O'Brien rightly said, it's the winner who writes your history. So for many people, the independence of India, for my parent, it was the partition of India. So history is from the prism of the writer, right? So the Mughals started writing chronicles of about and glorifying their emperors. Everything was glorified and exaggerated. And for some reason, they took to the Persian language, and Persian language in its poetry at least, not its food, exaggerates everything. So the whole sense of exaggeration was attributed to the Mughals, who wrote valiantly about everything, except that the poor hapless Mughal emperors, for some reason, individually eating, because koi na koi to poison kar dega unko, they were all loved khichdi. We can keep blaming the Mughals for their meat-eating habits and for being carnivores and for being whatever else, but all of them successive Mughal emperors, with the exception of Emperor Jahangir and probably Shah Jahan, all loved to have a vegetarian diet, right? Akbar, for instance, loved the khichdi. So did everybody else. Now the question is, and individually eating. They were not eating in public. They were going back to what the Vedic sages had, thali and donas. But I think one great remarkable thing that happened was that the Portuguese had introduced chili, right? And Janara, after many cups of Shiraz wine with the Kangra snow and rose water went to her father and said, Basha Salamat, Aadha Varz hain, I want to make this glorious city called Shahjahanabad, which he indulged and pampered his daughter. And in the center of Chandni Chowk was an aqueduct, a canal, right? Unfortunately, the Jamuna, as it was called then, or the Yamuna, was not exactly the prettiest river as many of our past make us believe. The water was arsenic. And when the water of the Yamuna went into the central verge of Chandni Chowk, it started poisoning people. So the Mir Bakawals or the Hakims went to Shah Jahan and they said that Hazur Ala, Badshah Salamat, ye jo lal mirach aayi hai, this new red chili that by the way, the Portuguese introduced the chili because they were not given the right of passage. They were not given the cargo rights. Now look, this is what poetic justice is all about. A lot of young people, including your students, Professor Pant, believe that chili is Indian and pepper is an import from Italy, to be had only with pasta and with pizza. I promise you that. I have done this in many days. They think that chili Hindustani hai and pepper is an expensive import. It's expensive, but it's not an import. It is the reason for all the damn gold. So Shah Jahan, and this is a farman, which incidentally is documented and preserved in the National Archives. They introduced chili into their food and the spices. And the Portuguese had been very cleverly enough. This whole microcosm of India, the Mughals never conquered Kerala. The Mughals never conquered Tamil Nadu. The Mughals did not conquer these two parts of India, right? The Portuguese plied, they introduced spices. The korma, which then therefore had spices and chili, did not have turmeric. And that's the difference. Because turmeric in itself is a very strong spice. So as Ms. O'Brien said, the turmeric was the spice of India. Now, the southern spices and the chili become the new spice of India. And the korma became so what you and I eat, right, is korma. And I've already mentioned about the onion. So when you hear about the story about do pyaza, lots of onions, don't be surprised. It's native to our country. And in many parts of India, it's do pyaza means barkat. Bahut sara, lots of it. It does not necessarily mean 2 portions of onions and 1 portion of meat. It means barkat, lots of. Anyway, for me, the biggest contribution of the Mughals as far as food and drink is concerned, apart from this lovely, delightful drink of Shiraz and snow, which I've tried to introduce at the Delhi. And those of you who go to Delhi Pavilion, and we certainly could do with some money, go and buy yourself a Shiraz. It's a nice drink. Is a biryani. Now, I hear a lot of strange people attributing everything to Iran. I mean, between you and me and the whole world and their auntie, I don't like their food at all, right? I mean, it's okay, but meetha bhi hota hai and so much of damn saffron. It's okay. The biryani is Indian, and I'll tell you why. The court language of the Mughals was Persian. Biryan means fried. It's fried rice. The pulao may have come from Persia, but the biryani is from the Mughal court. It's from Red Fort. It's from Shah Jahanabad. Biryan. And the trick of the biryan means, and those of you who are technical people, and Harpal, you will understand it, and I'm sure Professor Pant will, Maillard, the Maillard reaction. It means the browning. So जो browning होती है, जो biryani's trick is the browning or the Maillard reaction. And it's the fried rice of India. So yes, biryani is certainly be a part of the great Mughal contribution. So as I said, the life has taken a full circle. And today, I was trying to help ITC hotels do their service design. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, that single serve meals are back. So remember, the Central Asians introduced public eating. Ham pyala, ham niwala. The Mughals reintroduced the thali because they were all getting food poison. Then the British, when they came, they introduced public eating. And then, of course, we carried through, right? Now, the COVID has gone back to the Vedic eating of individual eating. The thali and the dona, right? So life is a full circle. With that,
Wonderful.
I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Anand. What a wonderful storyteller you are. It's a delight to listen to you, Mr. Anand. And wonderful insights you have given about the Mughals bringing in the community eating and then it getting propagated under the European rule and British rule in particular. And to elaborate more on that, may I invite Chef Umesh Mat. Chef Batu.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Anand, for such a lovely brief on the Mughal era food and the food before that. You see, the cuisine or the food of the Delhi has been going a change from the very beginning, and any food, any cuisine keeps changing from time to time. It's even today when we are sitting here, there is some experiments happening which is changing the food continuously. And one of the major thing which changes the food is the produce. Britishers came to India basically for trading of spices. Though the potatoes and the tomatoes and the chilies were gotten to India by the Portuguese. But potatoes, which has become such a major part of our cuisine today, was not popular in India. It was only the Britishers who popularized potato. In fact, in 1797, Britishers distributed free samples of potato seeds to the farmers of India, mostly to the northern part of the India, and offered a cash incentive for the growth of the potatoes. So they introduced potato to India, which you can see the effect it has had on the cuisine of not only Delhi, of all over India. You cannot imagine a dish in India today where potatoes is not used. Second ingredient, which again the Britishers popularized, was tomato. Though the tomato was again brought by Portuguese to India, but it was only that Britishers who had started cultivating tomatoes in England, that they brought this vegetable. They popularized the growth of tomatoes in India. So much so that tomatoes, when it was they started using it in Bengal, they called it Vilaiti Bengun. So the two main ingredients of the Delhi cuisine or the Indian cuisine, which is present cuisine also, were gotten to us by the Britishers. But I think the major change which the food of Delhi, the Britishers brought, was the introduction of tea. Tea was not so widely grown in India before the Britishers came. The tea was coming mainly from the China. And to give competition to the Chinese, the Britishers started growing tea in the hills of Assam. And the people of Delhi, or people of North India, who were mostly drinking milk, lassis for the breakfast or during the daytime or to quench their thirst, started getting addicted to tea. So that was the one change which the Britishers brought in terms of the produce they brought in India. Another reason that affects the change of the cuisine is the cultural interaction. The interaction of the people with the people who are cooking in India. So when the Britishers came to India, they set up their homes here. They set up their houses here, and there was this Bada Mem Sahab, the English woman, who had to control the household. She was called the Bada Mem, and she would control the kitchen of the house. She would control the gardening. She would control the laundry. She would control every part of the household. And she had a battery of servants available with her. And kitchen was one part where there were Indian chefs, there were Indian cooks who were being taught to cook English food by an English woman. And there, the experimenting of adding the ginger and the clove and the cumin and the coriander started, and that gave that changed the food of Delhi. But they also introduced foods which were not prevalent in India. They gave sponge cakes. They started making bread and butter puddings. They started making caramel custards. They started making lemon curd tarts, the scones, the breads, the souffles. They that part of the food which became popular Delhi and became a part of the Delhi cuisine was introduced by the Britishers. Though we had bakeries in India before the Britishers came, but these bakeries were not producing the kind of breads and the desserts which the Britishers introduced us. They also brought the evolution of soups, salads, which was not a part of the Delhi cuisine earlier. Soups like mulligatawny soup, tomato soup, that was brought by Britishers. It was the experiment of British using on by the Indian cooks. Then things like cutlets, croquettes, Indian masala omelette, sandwiches, kedgeree. These were the dishes which the Britishers introduced to the food of Delhi. So we had Indian chefs cooking these English dishes with the local ingredients. So though the food was, they were trying to make the food like what they were cooking in England, but the food which evolved was not exactly like that. It was a little different. And then when English were living here, they started marrying the Indian women here. And the food that evolved later on, which came to be known as Anglo-Indian food, it had Indian flavors, it had it had a combination of Indian flavors and British flavors, made by Indian chefs. They introduced pork chops to the Indian Delhi cuisine. But I think the major part of the influence of on the food of Delhi was making of curries. As Mr. Anand and pointed out, we had salans, we had kormas, we had neharis, but we did not have a curry kind of food in Delhi. So what Britishers did was that they started roasting meats, they started roasting vegetables, they started boiling meats, they started boiling vegetables. And then they started pouring sauces onto them, which was like flavored with cumin, which was flavored with pepper, which was flavored with coriander. And they called it like a curry. That gave birth to things like railway mutton curry, chicken curry, vegetable jalfrezi, potato curries. So the curries were cooked separately and the meats were cooked separately, or the vegetables were cooked separately, and then they were mixed together, which ultimately gave rise to what is we calling a fry pan cooking today. Before Britishers came in, the dishes were cooked individually, or even traditionally, the Indian food, the dishes, each dish is cooked individually. They are not prepared, the meats are prepared separately and the sauces prepared separately, and then they are amalgamated today. But today, even the food of Delhi, if you visit a restaurant or if you visit a hotel, in the a la carte menu, the dishes are kept separately prepared, and then there is a basic gravies, a basic sauces, which are prepared by the chefs. And as and when the order comes, they mix them together and produce the dish, which was the effect of British cooking on the Indian food. After the food, the Britishers also changed the way we ate. There was no dining table in the before the Britishers came here. They introduced the dining table. They introduced the crockery and cutlery. Before the Britishers came, we were mostly using metal utensils to eat out. It was either gold, it was silver, it was brass, it was copper, but they introduced porcelain, they introduced bone china. So it's not just the food, it's also the way we started eating was changing in Delhi. It was changing continuously with the coming of Britishers. Then they introduced the system of buffets. As Mr. Anand pointed out, we had community eating, we had individual eating, thali eating, but there was not a wide display of foods which was started by Britishers. But yes, fortunately or unfortunately, we may go back to the individual Vedic style of food eating post the COVID era. But before the COVID era, the buffets had become so popular in India or in Delhi or other parts of the country were introduced by the Britishers. Not only that, what we drank was also defined by the Britishers. They introduced whiskey to India. The whiskey was not produced in India. They set up breweries to produce whiskey. And we all know that how much whiskey is popular today. They set up beer manufacturing breweries in India. Beer was not consumed in India before Britishers came. The beer was initially imported from England, and to make it sustain the travel from England to India, they increased the percentage of alcohol and added hops to it, which gave birth to present beer in India. And they also gave tonic water to the world. They gave gin to the world. Britishers, when they came, they saw that malaria was affecting them badly. And they saw that Indians were eating quinine to cure their malaria. So they started mixing their gin with quinine and Sprite. And ultimately, that gave birth to the tonic water. So that was the effect of how Britishers affected the food of Delhi. It was not just their culinary instructions. It was the produce. It was the way of cooking. It was the way of serving. It was the way of dispensing the food and what went along with the food. They also introduced the jams, the marmalades to the Indian and the cuisine of Delhi. So that, in my opinion, is the brief of how the Britishers changed the cuisine of Delhi.
Thank you, Chef Mattu. Very good, nice account of a very long period when the British were there at the helm of affairs in our country. And I would like to bring a point to the audience today that it is a very ambitious task to chronicle the cuisine of Delhi for a very long period as we are really 2 millennia is what we are trying to cover today. It's not an easy job, and while the British were at the helm of affairs in India, there were a number of Nawabs, in Rampur and in Awadh and other places, they were also experimenting with the food and devising so many other things. But that is story for another era. And now I would like to invite Chef Harpal. 1947, I hail from Uttarakhand, but it so happened that my grandfather also was settled in Punjab in a town called Lailpur at that time. I think it is known as Faisalabad now. And in 1947, my father and my aunt, my father came to India in 1947 as a 5-year-old boy, right? And that is how the family stayed 3 years in the hills of Uttarakhand, and then again in 1950 the grandfather came down to Delhi, and we have been in Delhi ever since. So big change it was. I used to listen to my grandparents, and they would cry and laugh at the same time, remembering their time, during the partition. So it was such a horrific kind of an account which happened because like very rightly said by Mr. Anand, that independence in India was a sad affair and was a very happy affair at the same time, because with independence came the partition of the country and so many uh, kind of but a lot of change that brought out in the happening like that. Cuisine of Delhi, West Pakistani people from Pakistan, the Punjabi people coming down and settling in Delhi, and at the same time from East Pakistan also, which is now the Bangladesh. So it is my pleasure to invite Chef Harpal, and I will ask Mr. Sapra also to kindly keep his guns fired now, because everybody will be looking forward to listen to him also after Chef Harpal finishes. So, Namak Shamak Chef, the happy chef, the floor is all yours. Chef, unmute किया क्या? Chef Harpal, have you unmuted yourself?
Okay. Yeah, I think now.
Right.
Yes.
There you now. We hear you
Okay.
now.
Yeah, there I go. So to me, thank you, Kamal. To me, the cuisine, or actually a place, reflects its cuisine because of many reasons, and all of those reasons have been spoken about. So it is establishing a place, de-establishing a place. It is economy of a place which leads to trade, travel. Okay, it's immigration of people. It's because of the market space. So all of this is relevant maybe in BC, in 500 years from now, and in 100 years that we will see ahead of us. All of this will be relevant, and all of this probably will bring about a change in the culinary space in Delhi. So if we all know that how Delhi's food was influenced by Britishers, by Punjabis, by probably Mughals, by Iranians, Persians, or the trade routes people who kept coming here, bringing along with them their cultures, their cuisine, and then establishing their cuisine. So when immigration happens, immigration brings food, culture, and then it evolves. Then it localizes, then it internationalizes. So that's the beauty of Delhi. If Delhi has seen the Mughal era, British era, it has also seen the Punjabi era. Now, Punjabi era is the most interesting thing. I believe that is what we will all remember about. I mean, maybe everything is earlier is written about, but when the partition happened, the Punjabis came, and when they settled down in Delhi, what mostly they could do was live with trade as things settle down, or open food shops. And with them started the evolution of Delhi cuisine, actually, which we really remember. So the dal makhnis came in, the chickens came in, the roasts came in. Maybe they would have adopted these things while living in West Pakistan or in Afghanistan, for that matter, or ahead of that also. I mean, if you really see Sikhism, it went up to Iran, Iraq. Okay, it just did not live up to what we see as Kartarpur. Okay, it lived up to Iran, Iraq. So travel always happened between these spaces. And when actually the partition happened, did the evolution of the real food that we eat in Delhi now. Delhi butter chicken. So everywhere you go international, so you would see this word Delhi butter chicken. So that's how a place gets established, and it's because of these 5 things, like, you kind of stabilize a place where people come and live. Then again, there's destabilizing, and that's what is happening right now. So I will also go ahead of this era now that we are seeing. So what's also happening now, right now, how the country is asking people from other parts of the world to come back to their country. So I was reading in the last few weeks that Sikhs from Afghanistan are being asked to come back to the country and live back here. So I'm sure if they come back and live in Delhi, we will see a new Afghani Sikh cuisine, which probably may be something which is different. Of course, Afghans have a space in Delhi now where if you go to the Afghan market, you would see the Afghani cuisine. Okay, if you go to the Tibetan market in Delhi, you see the Tibetan food. If you go to probably the Nepalese market, you will see the Nepalese food in parts of Delhi. The whole spread in general is established by Punjabis, I would say, and that is what has spread the cuisine of Delhi. Earlier, probably it had, maybe 500, 600 years, or probably I would say more than that. I mean, 1,000 years back, the influence of a lot of our Indian rulers who were vegetarian. So it also evolved in a great circle that I was noticing and reading, that earlier it was vegetarian, then it became non-vegetarian, then it became international. Now we are heading to national, and we will head back to vegetarianism, which will lead to various things again in culinary in Delhi. So which will lead to vegan, maybe some diet foods, plant-based foods. So the new era of Delhi food will see something else. An evolution of traditional formats, probably from the thalis to individual meals, to the new age presentation of Indian food that we see in restaurants, which is what probably we see from the chefs of the new age chefs actually. So to me, actually, it is simple for any city to have its own cuisine. It needs to see how culture of the local space has adapted. So probably that was not so much visible or not so seen in the early eras. It only got registered after we saw Britishers, the Mughals coming in, then the Punjabis coming in, and now there are pockets in Delhi which see, various cuisines at their own level, and a fabric, which is the Punjabi fabric, I would say, across Delhi. So that is it could be Punjabi fabric, but it is layered with lot of culinary factors. Could be a Mughlai factor in general terms, I would say. Could be a Punjabi factor. These two have layered the complete culinary fabric of Delhi. So to me, these are the things that I see of Delhi cuisine. Then was probably vegetarian, saw a journey of lot of evolution because of the space being occupied by people coming for trade, travel, immigration. Culinary kept establishing in various formats there, and then a general fabric spread over the fabric of Punjabi food, which actually also got changed over a period of time, because I think it is only the Punjabis who are willing to adapt to the people's tastes. That is how I believe in the country. So you ask any Punjabi that I didn't like it, the first thing is that he will go and ask, what you didn't like it? Okay, can I change and bring it? But if you tell any other space, if you tell somebody that I didn't like the sambar, he says, no, this is the way it is made. Sorry, it will not be changed. But for a Punjabi, a butter chicken can be changed into any format the way you like it. So that's how the fabric spread actually. And now what we see as Delhi cuisine is a fabric of Punjabi cuisine layered by Mughlai or the Britishers or by the new age chefs. So that's what today's food of Delhi looks like. But I'm looking at maybe what's going to happen post-COVID era. Okay, so the evolution is clearly visible now, and what's going to happen to culinary space not only in just Delhi. Delhi would also see, because the places that are affected maximum will see the change in culinary. And what will come in is probably the influence of traditional kitchens from across the country. Okay, not nationally, I would be clear in this. National influence will not happen. Probably national travel will happen to India to wonder why the mortality rate was less. And I clearly say that the mortality rate in India is less, not because of anything else, not because of governance. It is only because of the food we ate and what food we have been eating. So that fabric will get another layer. So Delhi would get another layer of Himachali cuisine and Uttarakhand cuisine, the traditional foods which have been sitting in the hills of Himalayas, upper Himalayas. That fabric will be seen, because I was reading in the last 3 days in newspapers that Delhi airport suddenly sees the sale of turmeric milk and etc. rising as compared to other beverages. So in time to come, like Mr. Gautam Anand and I was talking about, okay, we were talking about bichu ghas, which is a kind of a saag, which is leaves, which has a lot of thorns. And I remember in my childhood, we would, as punishment, if we would catch a young boy, we would rub that bichu ghas on the person's arms to give him a punishment, because that causes irritation. But those things will see evolution. And mind you, I was just also reading about teas, and teas was not about the tea leaves. It was about karas. Okay, so a walnut leaf tree, which is so popular in the upper hills of Uttarakhand, Himalayas, which actually brings in so much of immunity, is what we will see. We will see change in beverages. We will see change in food habits. We will see change coming nationally and from various places, especially from the traditional and typical households, from the tribals. These cuisines will come to these cuisines will come to layer the fabric of the traditional cuisines that we have been seeing in Delhi or in Bombay or all across. So with this, I think there's lots for the world to actually look upon India and Indian food, and food that is going to come in the next 20 years, which is going to be completely different. And we will go back to the traditional kitchens and the traditional ingredients, which are very local and which geographically have been there for ages, which actually did not get their importance. Like probably, the famous restaurants across the world gave importance to local produce, but we always gave importance to what was loved by people across the country, or the acceptance was high. Now, even though if the acceptance is not high, people will slowly get adapted to what is national and build that into the fabric of food. So each city probably will see the change, and Delhi will definitely see change of their food habits by bringing in more immunity booster foods from the Himachal and Uttarakhand and maybe Kashmir, okay, which traditionally has fantastic local ingredients to be incorporated in food. So with this, I end my little talk that I have to talk about what Delhi has seen as food, what it will see, what it has seen, and what it will see in time to come. Thank you, Kamal.
Wonderful. Thank you, Harpal, for bringing in a lot of energy into the discussion. And before I invite Mr. Sapra, there is a question from Mr. Manjeet Singh Gill, who is also an honorable board member of IHM PUSA, and he serves on the board as a catering expert. So he has wondered, whether the panel would like to say that the food, what the common people were eating at various points of time in the history of evolution in Delhi, rather than the ruling class itself. And then he is curious to learn, what a few iconic or emblematic dishes, maybe in 1000 BC, then maybe at the time of the birth of Christ, and then 500 AD, and at different times. So I would request my honorable panel members to kindly prepare a few dishes, a few menu items, so to speak, and bring that up to the panel, when the opportunity is given to them after Mr. Sapra makes his presentation. So with a lot of pleasure, I would like to invite Mr. Anubhav Sapra. The kind of work that you have been doing, sir, is inspiring to so many youngsters in this country. And I know I have come across a few people who have come to Delhi as tourists, and they have spoken very highly about you. And we are all looking forward to listening about Delhi's food and how it is shaping the city now. Mr. Sapra, welcome.
Thank you, Kamal sir. So I will be talking more about the migrant community in Delhi and the food culture, how they have influenced it over the period of time. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
perfect. Yeah, thank you. So I will be talking more about what happened in last century, in more than 100 years. In 1911, the capital of Delhi was shifted from Calcutta to Delhi, and during that time, many Bengalis they migrated to Delhi, and there were two reasons why they migrated. First one was that they wanted to retain their position in the government offices, so that's why they migrated. Secondly, it's also about they were having some business concerns because the political capital shifted from Calcutta to Delhi, and they got settled in Old Delhi. You'll find a lot of Bengali community, and they have the food culture of Delhi. If you go to Old Delhi, right opposite Gurdwara Shishganj Sahib Ji, near Fountain Chalk, what we call Favara in Hindi, we have a very old sweet shop established in 1929, where you get Bengali sweets till date. Then the oldest Durga Puja was celebrated in Delhi since 1910, and till date, every year they organize Durga Puja celebrations. Then in 1960s, EPTP, the people from East Pakistan, displaced persons, they established their own community, what we know today we known as CR Park, and we call it a mini Kolkata. So you can say that the food of Bengali got integrated into the larger cuisine of Delhi, or what we can call it a more of a food. It became a food subculture as a part of Delhi's food culture. That's one community. Secondly, if we move on to the other community, people who moved from Tamil to Delhi, the oldest, the South Indian club that was established on Mandir Mark was established in 1920s as a kind of a recreational hub for Tamilians living together and celebrating together. And then Delhi Tamil Sangam was started in Connaught Place. Later, it got shifted to RK Puram. In fact, the oldest South Indian store, um, known as Madras store, started in 1932 in Gold Market area, and in 1959 it moved to Karol Bagh. Until date, many people from South India they live around Karol Bagh area. In fact, we have a very popular mess by the name called Ramanujan Mess. It still exists there, and then there are many other South Indian eateries around there, like Anna Mess is also very popular for Tamil cuisine. In fact, in 1930s, there's another restaurant by the name called Chidambaram. It's in Khanna Market near Lodi Colony. It still exists, and that was also established for the people who moved from Tamil, and they were working as government employees in British government. So it was started as a mess, and now it become a full-fledged restaurant. So you can say Tamilians also influenced their cuisine and got integrated into Delhi's larger cuisine. Until date, if you go to RK Malai Mandir, you have Matthew Cafe, or there are other small eateries all over, spread all over Delhi. Then third, if I talk about the cuisine of Malayalis, people who moved from Kerala. So during when Indian civil services, there were many people who were officers of Indian civil services from the time of British government after the independence. And then there were many people who worked as stenos, typists, and clerks in the Indian government. And they rented their places around Connaught Place, and they lived around the residential areas. They brought their own staff, the cooking staff, their drivers, all the way from Kerala. And they started, that also influenced Delhi's food culture. Till date, if you go to INA Market, we have a very famous Kerala hotel in INA Market. Then Kerala canteen also in Kerala Bhavan is also very popular. These were the three communities. Now in late 1950s and 1960s, when there was a Tibetan uprising, many people from Tibet region, they also moved to Delhi, which Mr. Harpalji just talked about. What we known as Majnu Ka Tila, that is named after the Gurdwara, which is very close to New Arunanagar colony and near the Yamuna River. That's the real name of that place, but popularly it's known as Majnu Ka Tila, and youngsters they call it MKT. There are many Tibetans living around there, and in fact, from there, the dish which has become a quintessential Delhi street food, what we known as momo, got popularized, and it's available all over Delhi. And now we have our own versions of that dish. And as Mr. Harpal sir said, that we have different layers. So the Punjabi, just to cater to Punjabi palate, we have different varieties of that particular dish available in nooks and corners of Delhi. Now coming to the last part, during this when this lockdown started, we all have seen how people were migrating from urban areas to the rural areas, and we don't talk much about the cuisine of people from Purvanchal side. That's from the eastern side, eastern Bihar and eastern UP. You won't believe, like in Delhi, the 40% of the population as of now is migrants. They have come from different parts of India. And yeah, so they have come from different parts of India. I live in North Delhi, Northwest Delhi of Mukherjee Nagar. My MLA, the member of Legislative Assembly, he is from Bihar. My member of Parliament, Mr. Manoj Tiwari, imagine, like the influence of that community has been a lot in the food culture of Delhi. And although it's not got that popularized compared to other communities living in Delhi, we till date we just talk about, when we talk about the Purvanchali cuisine and their influence in Delhi, we just talk about one dish, that is litti and chokha, or it has become more of a part of the street food culture, or there is just one upscale restaurant that we all know by the name Pot Belly. So that's the cuisine of Purvanchal, and it's more available in the outskirts of Delhi, where majority of people are living. Then we have migrants from Uttarakhand as well. Most of the people who work in the restaurants, who make tandoor, who work on the tandoor, or who make breads, they are mostly, majority of them are from Uttarakhand region as well. And then we have people who have migrated from Haryana because they got married into Delhi, so they became also integrated part of Delhi's food culture. Then we have people who migrated from Rajasthan. So it's, for me, it's more about the people who have migrated from different parts of India to Delhi, and that's how the food is evolving. And what we can say, the only constant thing is change. Until date, the Delhi's food is evolving. And when we talk about Delhi's food, we always forget about the contribution of the migrants. It's more about, we talk more about how the Britishers or Mughals, or what, how the food culture changed after partition due to the influence of Punjabi food, but not the migrants, and how it has been evolved over the years. And now coming to the last part of my talk, I want to talk more bit about the old Delhi's food culture. So old Delhi is considered to be a food capital, or we can say a foodie city of Delhi. And there's also been, if you just talk about old Delhi's food culture, there are multi layers which could be easily recognized if you go to old Delhi. There were people who, when the partition happened, there were people from Muslim religion living in Old Delhi. There were people from caste. There were people from Baniya caste, and there were people who migrated from Punjab region to Delhi. They all influenced the food of that particular region. So when we say Old Delhi, it's not only the Mughlai food. If you just walk from one stretch of Red Fort, say from Digambar Jain Mandir, the entrance of Red Fort, to Fatehpuri, you will see they have worship places of all different religion. We have a Jain Mandir, we have a Gauri Shankar Mandir, we have a church, we have a Gurdwara, then we have a masjid. So you can see, like, when we have so many food subcultures, they have their own influence on the food of Delhi as such. And then they are from different caste within the Hindu religion. Like, say, till date, if you go to Old Delhi, many places they don't use onion and garlic in food. Why? Because there are Jain people who live in that part of the city, so they don't use onion and garlic in food. Secondly, there are people from priestly caste. They don't eat onion and garlic. They regard it as more a tamasic food. So that's why the food is all cooked without onion and garlic. And till date, in that stretch, there's all vegetarian food joints, except there's one food joint near the Fountain Chalk where you get non-vegetarian dishes. Then the food is also very seasonal in Delhi. What the locals eat. See, nowadays we are talking about the raw turmeric and all those stuff. But if you walk on the streets of Delhi, the food keeps changing. You'll get to see what locals are eating, what they eat, all seasonal. Then when the winters come, on the streets you will see the carts selling a daulat ki chaat, or then there will be shakar kandi ki chaat, which is sweet potatoes, the chaat made out of that. So that's also quite seasonal. Then the halwas will change. The halwa, it could be aloe vera ka halwa, or it could be hapshi halwa, it could be gond halwa, it could be gajar halwa or moong dal halwa. That's all seasonal. And it all changes according to festivals. So during, if you go around Holi festival, you will see Sindhi samosa or Sindhi jalebi being sold in different shops in Old Delhi. Then during Ramzan time, you'll get to see keema samosa, keema goli, and other dishes like different kinds of breads, like dil khush bread, or they have butter sheermal, which is again available only during those festivals. The food also changes according to festivities and according to season, and it also depends on different religion and different communities living within that part of the city. So I can only say that the food, what Dr. Shaman said, that it's God's influence. This always keeps changing. The new ideas, new influences, and it's more about the communities that they have migrated and they have brought their cuisine and got assimilated into the larger context of the food culture of Delhi. And for me, these are all food subcultures that defines the food culture of the city.
So, Mr. Sapra, wonderful insight it was. If I may ask you, sir, there were so many people who would be interested to know if you were to tell about 10 iconic dishes or emblematic dishes of Delhi right now. If somebody were to come to Delhi and he's a foodie like we all are, so what is it that we would be recommending to them? Let's say 5 vegetarian items and 5 non-vegetarian.
Oh, that's a tough question, but I will say in non-vegetarian, I will say they can start with nahari and paya. That's again the authentic dish of Delhi, and then
Right.
they can move on to the korma and different varieties of salan, which is available. Then there are different kinds of breads, so they can also try sheermal. And now we have different another version of sheermal that come in Old Delhi, which is topped with a layer of ghee, and then you have pistachios and dry fruit. So they can try that.
Right.
Then if they want to try more of a, I'm not I'm telling more in a like mixed dishes, not a point, not like listicle. So if they
Right.
want to try the local dishes, they can try bedmi puri, which is again Delhi's specific dish, which is a kind of a puffed bread like a puri, which is stuffed with urad ki dal and served with methi ki chutney and aloo ki sabji and chole. Then they can try Nagori. That's again quintessential Delhi's dish. It's a small puri which is served with a suji ka halwa. Then they can try kulle ki chaat. That's again quintessential Delhi's kind of chaat, which is a scooped out food stuffed with the chickpeas, pomegranate, powdered sugar. You can black salt, roasted cumin. So they can try that. Then they can also try Delhi's famous kheer, which is available at the old kheer shop near Lal Kuan. Then they can visit Kuremal shop for the stuffed kulfi. They introduced stuffed kulfi long back in 1910. So they have mango stuffed kulfi, they have apple stuff and orange stuff, pineapple stuff, then area, they can also go for rabdi and khurchan. That's again Old Delhi's very famous dish. Then there are many sweets also to be tried. As I said, if they're coming, it's more of a seasonal. If they're coming in the winters, I would suggest they can go to Shireen Bhavan and try all different kinds of halwas which are available there, like aloe vera, safed gajar ka halwa. There's the only shop in Delhi where you get safed gajar ka halwa, and that too only for a month. So they can try that, and there's so many dishes to be tried. And
I'm
then
already drooling, Mr. Sapra.
and we also forget, like we didn't talk about the quintessential again Delhi street food, chole bhature and chole kulche. How can we miss that?
Absolutely.
And
How could one
and
miss
then
that? Yes.
yeah, and then butter chicken. The food, in fact, I was talking about like how the food has evolved, is still evolving. If you go to
Absolutely.
different parts of the city, nowadays we have started using a lot of butter in even like our classic dishes. If you go to Old Delhi
Right.
nowadays, they top the kebabs with butter. They will add spices. They
Absolutely.
will add dahi. And now we have other version of butter chicken, like the butter chicken which we know is more of a tomato-based sauce with lots of cream and dry fruit. Now we have another version of butter chicken tikka, which is more of a grilled chicken. They top it with dahi, that yogurt. Then they add spices. Then they add loads of butter, and that's again a very popular, upcoming, or you can say well-established dish in all parts of the city.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice that you brought the story of butter chicken here. I am trying to connect Chef MS Gill, who is there with us. You know, he's one of the attendees not being in Delhi. He could not be on this panel today. And he has been telling us, you know, butter chicken, the name did not come from butter as such. The degree of cooking for the dal and the degree of cooking of those tomatoes gravy, it was such that texture, it became buttery, like makhmali and reshmi textures. So buttery was a texture which one achieved, you know, by finish in cooking and preparation. So I hope, you know, if we trying to get chef on the panel, not on the panel, but to the webinar. And I would like to go back to other panelists. And Mr. Anand, you have been a Delhi person, born in Delhi, and Nizamuddin is a place, you know, Nizamuddin Aulia Dargah and different kind of melting pot of various cultures it is in that particular area. So if there is any particular thing which has not been covered by Mr. Sapra, would you like to share that with us, please? Mr. Anand?
Sir, his mic is muted. Sir, his mic is muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I think Manjeet Gill is the best person to talk about the Makhni, because he is the one who educated me. Because I was also under the confusion this Gill who should come and he told me, he says, Gautam, दाल बुखारा होती है ना, ये मक्खनी जो होती है, viscosity होती है, ये तो मक्खन नहीं होता. It's true, it's a science. So, you know, I like Manjeet a lot because he applies science to food, you know. And that is my respect for people like Manjeet, you know, is significantly high because he always applies science to food. Anyway, yeah. So if you were to go to this, you know, I will only remind Anubhav that he keeps talking about old Delhi, but I belong to older Delhi. And my older Delhi precedes Anubhav's obsession by 400 years, right? And yes, if you want to go to older Delhi and you go and have I think older Delhi has contributed the best bread in India. It's called Khamiri Roti. You know, and वो खमीरी रोटी जो होती है, it's made in the iron tandoor. वो खमीरी रोटी खाइए जाके वहाँ पर निजामुद्दीन में. और दूसरा नरगिसी कोफ्ता. ये जो नरगिसी कोफ्ता है, my God, लजीज और नफीस है. मतलब कि अब आप देखिए, it's been copied by the Scotch eggs. Contrarian to what people say, the Nargisi kofta is not copied from the Scotch egg. It is the Scotch egg which have been copied from the Nargisi kofta. Okay. Or when you go to Nizamuddin, you have to do what I still like doing. Is I like farmaishi food. I do not eat on the street. I order in. Farmaishi is what food you have to tell them. So Nargisi kofta, outstanding. Shami kebab, oh ho. You know, लुत्फ मैं तुझे क्या कहूँ ए जालिम, तूने कभी कमबख्त कभी खाया ही नहीं. वो शामी कबाब ये खाइए, अपना क्या बोलते हैं नरगिसी कोफ्ता खाइए, और इश्टू, ये जो सालन है वही दो प्याजा है, वही इश्टू है. जो सालन है वही 2 प्याजा है, वही स्टू है। वहाँ का स्टू खाइए, आप ज़रूर खाइए। और बाकी तो अब वो वीरान है थोड़ी गलियां, लेकिन आप याद रखिए, हिस्टोरिसिटी देखिए। मैं बताऊं आपको कि क्या मिनिफिसेंस है निजामुद्दीन की। हजरत निजामुद्दीन, अमीर खुसरो, जो रेख्ता हम आपको कह रहे थे, रेख्ता द लैंग्वेज, आवर स्पोकन लैंग्वेज was invented by Amir Khusro. Mirza Ghalib, Jahanara Begum, the lady who had copious amounts of Shiraz wine with snow, all buried. Humayun himself, Hamida Begum, the builder of Humayun's tomb, all buried there. Right? And remember that, can you imagine? And Mirza Ghalib was not Muslim enough to be buried in the Fatehpur mosque. And Jahanara Begum, Ada, who I admire, and Zebunisa, Aurangzeb's daughter, all buried in, and Aga Khan the first. It's a remarkable place, you know. And to answer Manjeet's question on the street food, तो उस पे थोड़ा सा जुमला है। तो गिल साहब, आप सुन रहे हैं, पहाड़ों में बैठे हैं, तो मैं आपको जो सिंप्लिसिटी है, हिंदू जो आवाम खाता है, जो मिस्किन लोग खाते हैं, हमारे जैसे गरीब खाते हैं, उसका एक ही मुहावरा है, एक ही उदाहरण है। वो आपको बता देता हूँ कि खिचड़ी तेरे 4 हैं यार, खिचड़ी तेरे 4 हैं यार, सब्जी, घी, पापड़, अचार।
Yes, absolutely.
We have been eating the khichdi from the Vedic period for thousands of years. And let me tell you, वो Punjabi hegemony है कि वो बीमार लोग खाते हैं। Punjabis are a very racial people. वो हर चीज में अपना कोई निकताची नहीं करता है। Punjabi. And so therefore वो कहते हैं, हमको तो कहा गया था बीमार हो गए तो खिचड़ी खाए, पर इतने लोग खाते हैं खिचड़ी। और खिचड़ी का एक चावल है, there's a rice grain. And Waris Shah, in Kissa Waris Shah, 400 years ago, wrote in, the person who wrote he wrote about a particular strain of rice, which must be used for khichdi. It's called satra. You can only use one particular grain of rice. It's called satra or satara for khichdi. So khichdi tere 4 hain yaar, sabzi, salan, ghee, achar.
Right.
तो जिस
Wonderful, Anand sir.
देखिए, निजामुद्दीन हमारे साथ चलेंगे तो आप ऐसा खाना खिलाएंगे आपको कि आप पागल हो जाएंगे। But I am not here for me. As I said, for me it's a hobby. But right now, we have to be careful because of war.
Absolutely. Right. Thank you, Mr. Anand. And I would like to request Dr. Kamen also to please come in and tell us, if we were to tell a few dishes of the era that we have covered. Dr. Kamen? Dr. Kamen? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Now I can, yes.
Okay. I was going to say, Mr. Anand mentioned one dish which I would have suggested, which is khichdi, from that earlier period. But I still go back and I see the something like having an aloo tikki kichat, has its origins in that time. One dish, not so much a dish, but gujak, sorry, I may not be saying it in the right accent, but the sweet made with sesame or angur, the thing you have in winter.
Chikki.
Or gujak.
Gujia.
Gujia.
It's not gujia, it's gajak.
Chikki.
Chikki or the gajak.
Gajak.
रबड़ी होगी, सॉरी, क्या बोलते हैं उसको अपना?
Gajak.
रबड़ी या गजक?
Til gajak.
Gajak है because sesame seeds are native to our place.
Revdi, sir, revdi.
Revdi, gajak, tilkut, different names it has. Tilkut also is called in some part of our country.
Yes.
Very well. Very nice account, and Chef Umesh, Chef Harpal, would you like to add anything about the iconic dishes that the city of Delhi now boasts of? Any recommendation you would have for the people coming to the city?
Well, I think now, right now, it's quite spread out to actually find out. Unless, like Mr. Anand said, that you need to go to those small bylanes to actually find out good food, and the traditional food. But typically, quite a lot of it is something which is like fabricated in the new era. But I would come back to Manjeet Chef's topic that he had said about in my house when we used to make dal or we actually never made a butter chicken in our house. It was always a curry which was either spiced and no tomatoes in it mostly. So, but the dal was never with butter, and for a simple reason that the viscosity definitely came from the texture of black dal, the way it was slow cooked. But it was very, very important to add clarified butter, which was ghee at that point of time, because butter is a processed food which we are seeing in the new age. Ghee was there earlier, which was made from various mediums. It was made from yogurt, made from malai, and ghee was very essential, because if ghee is not added to either a dal or a khichdi, remember the science does not fit in, because the protein will never be absorbed and you will always have problems. And like in the new age, we always hit at garlic. Earlier, we never used to hit at garlic. It was mostly ginger, because that's how the whole balance and science of food would happen with dals and the butter chickens. And anything that has more garlic, I tell you right now, also at this point of time. So you will feel bloated, and anything which has ginger, you will not feel bloated. But we should not also forget the parathas, which we are seeing, which we missed on our discussions in this topic. That parathas also, have seen quite a lot of impact in Delhi, whether it was, the famous street or at the Chandni Chowk. So parathas definitely have a lot of impact in Delhi's breakfast culture, I would say.
I couldn't agree more with you, Harpal. I had gone to Dubai a couple of years back, and I came across a store called Paratha King there. And the shop, these people are boasting of more than 100 varieties, of parathas. Anything under the sun, they can stuff a paratha out of it and present it to you. So I think it is also like chola bhatura and kebab and different things. Even paratha would qualify to come into that list. So, Chef Matu, would you like to come in and tell about a few iconic dishes, sir? You did mention about category. You did mention about the railway mutton curry. You did talk about the cutlets. The railway still goes very strong with those cutlets and croquettes and Chef Matu.
I have discussed about the halwas.
Yes.
There are urad ki dal ka halwa, moong ki dal ka halwa, gajar ka halwa, kali gajar ka halwa, kache papite ka halwa. So Delhi has a lot of varieties of halwas, and the mood of the halwa changes with the season. And lasan. So urad ki dal ka halwa is one thing which I think is very iconic and is very different, and you can get it at Biryani's in Old Delhi. Urad ki dal ka halwa and moong ki dal ka halwa is very, very popular in Delhi, and as the winters come in. And of course, the jalebis and the rabdis, and the texture of jalebis has evolved. Earlier, the jalebis used to be basically made with fermented flour only. But now, to make the crisper varieties, people have started adding urad ki dal into it. So the jalebis have become smaller, crisper, and crunchier. Whereas the older jalebis used to be crunchier from outside, softer from inside, more juicy, more this. So I think these are some of the iconic dishes of Delhi which are there to be.
We knew Jalebi's cousin called Imarti, which had the moong dal already. Traditionally, it was there.
That's
Urad dal.
so present jalebi is a kind of fusion between Imarti and jalebi. But
Absolutely.
traditionally, jalebi would not have any dal added to it. But as on present conditions market, I have seen a lot of people adding dal to the jalebis, which makes it crunchier, which makes it more crispier. But traditional jalebis, which you
Right. Thank you, Chef Matu. And that today's webinar, I cannot thank my honorable panel members enough for sparing the valuable time and bringing their expertise, the hard work that they have spent on researching the cuisine of Delhi for a number of years and bringing that all wisdom, that all knowledge to the table today. I'm grateful to the people who have logged in. We were challenged because of technology today. For some reason, our networks were not working so well, but still so many people have been coming in and they were getting disconnected. But I would like to thank them for the patience that they have, and I would like to assure them that the recording of this webinar would be posted on our social media handles for them to have the benefit of viewing this again. And I would like to thank each and every person who came on the panel today. I would like to finish my thank you by saying that all to our campus whenever you are visiting, having this friendship with you for a long, long time, usually beneficial kind of a friendship. And I couldn't indicate to you, my team, everybody is conveying their thanks, their gratitude to all of you. And hopefully after this situation, now we will have the pleasure of meeting all of you in person and for Hospitality Institute. Thank you very much.